Hi, welcome to Bio 301 Human Sexuality with me, your instructor, Cynthia Anderson Sanchez. Today we are going to briefly overview gender identities and sexual attraction. A lot of times we'll hear the term LGBTQ, so we're going to look at what that means and look at some general definitions to give us a basis of some of the things we're going to talk about today. Many people refrain from talking about sexual orientation and gender identity because they are unsure of what to say or are afraid of offending somebody or saying the wrong thing or using the wrong terminology. Also, the language around gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity and expression, they shift very rapidly. Definitions assist us with understanding and communicating, yet it is important to realize that people cannot be placed into a box. So what do we mean by So what do we mean by LGBTQ? Well, it's an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and or questioning. Additions to this acronym, sometimes you'll see it with an A for asexual or ally. Sometimes you'll see it with the addition of an I for intersex. The LGBTQ community is a thriving group. It estimates for 2011, it estimated that it had 9 million Americans, adults identified as LGBTQ. They represent a diverse group of people from all different races, ethnic backgrounds, religious convictions, belief systems, and ages. So there are various versions of the LGBTQ acronym. If the letters for all of the groups are included, these abbreviations can become quite lengthy and cumbersome. As a result, most just opt for the frequently used theoretical grouping of LGBTQ, but you will see a lot of different versions of this from time to time. However, there is some debate about whether or not all these groups of individuals should be included together in one abbreviation, since they may face different issues and have different concerns. Others suggest that solidarity is important. Furthermore, there is also a debate about which group should be represented first, as though there was an order of importance. While there are certainly debates about which abbreviation is most appropriate, the Welcoming Project uses the LGBTQ abbreviation since it is easily recognized as representative of diversity. While we acknowledge that some groups are not represented in the abbreviation, we want to stress that the Welcoming Project is supportive of all persons, and its vision is that all people are welcome, and it's intended to support all people. So what is the Q for? Let's talk about the Q that is questioning and what that means. Questioning is an individual who's unsure about his or her sexual orientation or their gender identity, and they prefer to identify as questioning rather than adhering to a label that does not designate how they feel. In reality, there should be as many labels as there are people. When we attempt to use labels to communicate about gender identity and sexual attraction, we will never succeed in finding a description that works perfectly for each person. Let's start with A's. One of the ones I wanted to talk about today is agender. A person that identifies themselves as agender is typically a person that has no or very little connection with the traditional system of gender. So they usually do not identify themselves with male or female. Sometimes they will call themselves genderless or gender neutral.
You must deal with this stuff I really want to hear your point of view on
With
this.
stereotypes? Yeah, I mean, I've never looked in a mirror sobbing while taking a wig off. That's never happened to me. I'm just grateful I'm here and you didn't have Jared Leto play me tonight. Yeah, I deal with all sorts of stereotypes. Some of them are true. I always say I'm almost more sexist since I've started estrogen therapy because I have like no hand-eye coordination and I'm crying all the time. But so stereotypes are really annoying. When they're done for comedy, I think that's a great context for it. It makes people laugh. It makes all of us laugh at each other.
It brings out the dumbness of it.
Exactly. And it brings us closer together laughing at how different all of us are. And I think that's really important. When it affects decision making or people getting employed or things like that.
That's a problem.
Or then it's a huge problem. But yeah, people tend to look at me like I have a broken leg. Like they're just like, oh, this must be so terrible for you because you had to go through a journey. And I'm like, I've had an awesome life. It's been super easy.
You don't have a broken leg. You just have a leg you don't use.
I have third leg. Yeah.
Gender versus sex. Gender is a person's internal sense of themselves as male, female, both, or neither, otherwise known as gender identity. This also refers to the outward presentation and behaviors, and that would be considered gender expression. Gender norms, of course, vary among different cultures, and they vary with the time period. Sex, on the other hand, is one's biological and physical attributes, including external genitalia, sex chromosomes, internal reproductive structures, and even their physiology and the physiological expression and being able to receive different hormones in different cells. When we talk about sexuality, it describes how one experiences and expresses oneself as a sexual being. It begins to develop in early childhood and continues over the course of one's lifetime. And it is definitely fluid, meaning it can change over time, whether that time be a lifetime or even moment to moment. When we talk about sexual orientation, this is an inherent or immutable, enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. It describes a person's emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Some examples of sexual orientation could be homosexual, which is gay or lesbian, bisexual, asexual, or pansexual. Some people might not know what pansexual it is. It's basically attracted to all genders and sexes and all different types of gender identities and masculine traits and female traits, regardless of the sex or the gender identity of the particular person. So anything goes in that case. With gender identity, gender identity is the innermost concept of self as male, female, or a blend of both or neither of those. This is how an individual perceives themselves and what they identify themselves as to other people and to themselves. One's gender identity can be the same or different from their sex assigned at birth. It is also a fluid quantity that can often change over time. Gender transition. This is the process by which some people strive to more closely align their internal knowledge of gender with its outward appearance. Some people socially transition where they might begin to dress or use names and pronouns and or be socially recognized as another gender. Others undergo a physical transformation in which they will modify their bodies through medical interventions. A person that identifies himself as androgynous is a gender expression that has elements of both being masculine and feminine. Occasionally, this is used in place of a term intersex, which describes a person that has both male and female anatomy. A person may also be aromantic, not aromantic, but aromantic. A person that is aromantic may experience little or no romantic attraction to others or has a lack of interest in romantic relationships and behaviors. Aromanticism also exists on a continuum form. people who experience no romantic attraction or have any desire at all for romantic activities, all the way to the other extreme to those who experience low levels or romantic attraction under certain conditions. Many of these different places on the continuum have their own identity as well, with their own labels. Asexual behavior. Asexual are people that identify themselves as asexual, experience little or no sexual attraction to others, or the lack of interest in sexual relationships or behavior. Asexuality exists on a continuum from people who experience no sexual attraction at all or have no desire for sex, to those who experience low levels or sexual attraction only under specific conditions. And many of these different places on the continuum have their own identity labels.
Good morning, John. Today, we plumb the depths of the marvelously complex human. But first, allow me to acknowledge that I am not a sociologist. I'm also a straight white man who doesn't have to worry about a lot of the hate that a lot of other people do have to worry about. But my goal with this video is I want people to understand, because I think understanding will lead to less hate and also less self-hate. For a lot of people, it's nice to imagine that humans are simple and that you can know a person's sex and then you will know all sorts of things about them deeply and clearly. And if you don't fit into this nice little box, people who do can get really confused and sometimes even angry. And if you yourself don't fit into one of these nice little boxes and you think that people should, then you end up hating yourself. And that's probably even worse. I think the best and maybe only way to solve this problem is for people to understand that there are no nice shiny boxes. Or if there are shiny boxes, there are an infinite number of them, enough to put all of the people who currently exist, have ever existed, and will ever exist. So, together, let's understand. We're going to start simple. What's going on down here, in between the legs, that is your sex, your biological sex, and it tends to be binary, though there are all sorts of conditions that result in intersex individuals. And as interesting and complicated as this is, the rest of it is much more complicated, so I'm just going to move on from here, because we all kind of get what sex is. Now we move on up to the top, to the brain, which is the thing that decides what gender you identify with, whether you feel like a man or a woman or neither or both, because the fascinating thing is, as much as we try to label things, there is no way to label every point on an infinite continuum, and that's what we're dealing with here. So, to actually visualize how this works, I've created a graph for you. On the x-axis, we have gender, male to female, and on the y-axis, we have the intensity of the identification with that gender. I would be about here, because I identify as a man, though I recognize that there are some womany parts of me, but let's also put a hypothetical biological female on the graph that identifies very strongly as a man. Now, that can be really uncomfortable, especially when there's a bunch of people in the world who insist on calling him a woman just because of the body that he happens to be very uncomfortable with, which is why sex does not determine the pronoun you should use. Gender does. Now, moving on to your heart, your metaphorical heart, of course. This is who you're attracted to. Men, women, all genders. Again, it's a spectrum, and that spectrum includes intensity, because there are people who don't feel strong sexual attraction at all. That's why asexual is a sexual orientation. A newer idea that I was happy to be exposed to yesterday on Tumblr is the idea of romantic orientation. These are the people that you want to have strong, intimate relationships with, but it sort of separates out the idea that sex has to be the goal or end point or like end all and be all of every intimate relationship. Now that we've dealt with how we feel, let's deal with what happens when other people actually get involved. That's sexual behavior, which is actually very different from sexual orientation. And that might seem a little bit strange at first, but it's not. Consider, for example, a heterosexual priest. That priest's orientation is heterosexual, but because of his religion, his behavior is celibate. Here we're not talking about the preference, we're talking about the behavior. Now built on top of all of this are gender roles, which are built by societies, not by individuals. The obvious ones are masculine gender roles and feminine gender roles, but as all dichotomies are false dichotomies, this one is a spectrum too. Now that we've sort of gone over all of this, it's important to note that every single one of these categories is independent from each other. So a biological female can be a man who only has sex with women despite the fact that he's attracted to both men and women and kind of, feels more comfortable in feminine gender roles. That may not be the most common combination of these factors, but it's certainly not weird. And another important point, many people move across these spectrums, sometimes from year to year, sometimes hour to hour. But what's really important is that we trust ourselves, and we understand ourselves, and we love and respect ourselves, and we grant that same understanding and respect to the people around us. Because when the world becomes one of infinite continuums and those false dichotomies break down, and those two shiny boxes break apart into 7 billion shiny boxes, it's actually pretty beautiful. John, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Great. Did you know about 2% of all babies born in intersex is used for 2% of babies who are born with naturally occurring variations in chromosomes, hormones, genitalia, and other sexual characteristics. Bisexual, a person who is emotionally, physically, and/or sexually attracted to people of their own gender as well as people from another gender. This attraction does not have to be equally split or indicate a level of interest that is the same across the genders or sexes an individual may be attracted to. Also, pansexual is very similar to this, but it's a less popular term, which means a person who can be attracted to any sex, gender, or gender identity. Homosexual is a term describing a person who is attracted to members of the same sex or gender. Gender transition. Gender transition is the process by which some people strive to more closely align their outward identity with the gender that they know themselves to be. To affirm their gender identity. People may go through different types of transitions, including social transition, which includes a name change, a change in pronouns, appearance, clothes, or hairstyle, a legal transition, which is the process of updating documents and identity records like driver's license, birth certificate, to reflect a person's authentic gender and name. Different states and localities have different rules, often making this process pretty challenging. There's also medical transition, which is for children, this may include the use of hormone blockers to delay the onset of puberty. It may also include cross-sex hormones to induce a puberty that is more consistent with the child's gender identity, or for adults to promote physical changes. This can also be included in gender affirmation surgeries. So what does it mean to be transgender? The answer is actually incredibly diverse. Some transgender people identify as male or female, and some identify as genderqueer, non-binary, agender, or somewhere else on or outside of the spectrum of what we understand gender to be. When we talk about gender, the definition is it's an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or expression is different from the cultural expectations based on the sex that they were assigned at birth. Transgender, people that are transgender, being transgender does not imply any specific sexual orientation. Therefore, transgender people may identify as straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, etc. Some transgender people might take hormones or have surgery as part of a transition, and some don't. Some choose to openly identify as transgender, and some might identify as men or women. Metrosexual is a popular term as well. Metrosexual means, so what does metrosexual mean? What's the difference between a metro guy and a non-metro guy? Isn't metrosexual just another word for gay? No, it's not. I'll explain why. If your ringtone is from Kim Possible, okay, not necessarily. These are questions that some people might find themselves answering on a daily basis, and we will attempt to answer those now. There's a lot more to metrosexual than, being able to fit in good-looking jeans and plucked eyebrows and flowing hair. Mark Simpson wrote, "Metrosexual man, the single man with a high disposable income, living or working in the city, because that's where all the best shops are, is perhaps the most promising consumer market of the decade." In the 80s, he was only found to be inside fashion magazines such as GQ and television advertisements for Levi's, jeans, or in gay bars. In the 90s, he's everywhere and he's going shopping. Okay, when we talk about being more gender neutral in our language as well as our stereotypic expectations of other people, I think it's important to start to use different terminology. So instead of he, she, maybe think about using they instead. The singular they is neutral. If you're trying to make an example of a hypothetical general person, they makes them as general as one can imagine. Consider, if someone hugged me, I'd hug her back, versus if someone hugged me, I'd hug them back. I'm going to hug everyone back, so there's no question of that. So for me, I'm going to use they. The singular they is easy. Writing with non-gender neutral pronouns is a serious pain. Some people prefer the Franken-word she, he, while others rack their brain. Some stick with a particular pronoun for one paragraph or chapter, then they swap out the one that they're using. Alternatives is to alternate between sentences. I'll use he in one sentence and the following sentence she. Pretty cumbersome and confusing as well. So, but when you use the word they, it's all inclusive and it flows a lot better and it's a lot less confusing for your reader. They does not assume a person's gender. It doesn't assume that there are only two genders. It's inclusive of all people of all different genders, including me, you, everyone else. It's a metaphorical blanket that can cover the human population, which non-metaphorically would be a cuddle celebration, according to this website, which I think is cute. The singular they is also classy. The English language greats have used it throughout history for the past 700 years, since at least the 14th century. Some people object to they and cite grammar as their plea, but it was classically used by Chaucer, Shakespeare, Austen, and Thackeray. So who would be to say it's not good enough for me? If you heart the singular they, you can use it personally today. But for professionals and academic writing, there are style guides in the way. This is where this love letter changes its direction and goes from dotting on a pronoun to open a call to action. So gentle internet, hear my call now and spread it far and wide. By the end of 2016, let's get singular. Let's get singular they, adopted by every style in the guide. Okay, so let's talk about your soup recipe. We're all snowflakes, but we're all also stereotypes. Let me try to help you understand with a hot bowl of soup. You Soup is presented by Metrosexual, it's pronounced metrosexual.com, and I have the link here for you. And You Soup is a tool that is dedicated into the understanding of diversity and the intersections of gender identity. So the ingredients of your You Soup include your base and broth. These are factors like your race, your ethnicity, your gender, your disability status, and your sexuality. And then we're going to add in some additional ingredients here, such as your socioeconomic status, geographic location, education, and your family structure. And you could add in hobbies, passions, religious faith, belief systems, career, political beliefs, and then secret ingredients, your personal experiences, your changes to other ingredients, hidden identities, and misperception of ingredients. Once you have all of these together in your soup, you are going to combine these base ingredients to create broth and bring to a boil. Add early additions and simmer over a low heat for about 18 to 25 years. Adding optional and secret ingredients to taste makes one wonderful you. So, stereotypes versus snowflakes. There are two extremist views of identity. On one side, we have the idea that people in a group are all the same and that they have stereotypic behavior. Well, on the other side, that everybody should be absolutely unique and be treated as snowflakes. Well, we're not all the same, but we're also not that different. So we can identify with a group and be completely individual at the same time. So you've been told all your life that you're unique, you're special, you're like a snowflake, nobody is like you, you're 1 in 7 billion, or 1 in 108 billion, and estimated total of number of humans ever, if you wanted to get technical, and nobody can take that away from you. Okay, that's pretty great, and for the most part true, but people can feel that this might be isolating if there's if they don't have a group or a place to belong or a place to fit in. So this can also be seen as lonely and isolating, and it shouldn't be, because that's not the whole story. At the same time, you've been taught that people in a particular group have a certain look or behavior or act a certain way, a certain attitude, a certain belief system. So which is true? Is it the stereotype or the snowflake? Well, kind of both and kind of neither. Now, you at a basic level are a combination of dozens or more of different identities that merge to form the unique individual that is you. Some of these identities were granted to you at birth, including race, gender identity, sexuality, ethnicity. Others were imposed on you or ascribed to you as a child, including your socioeconomic status, your geographical location and education. Some were your choice throughout your lifetime, your hobbies, your career, your religion, your experiences, and some others aren't. Your identities that were falsely assumed of you by others, and your abilities. Taking all of your different identities and adding them up in order to get you. There has likely never been another person like you in all of the 108 billion of Earth's history of people whose you soup ingredient has a list exactly the same as yours. There are a ton of identities out there, and each one of those has a long list of stereotypes often attached to it, though. Expectations that we make of people based on their group identity. Stereotypes make a person sometimes jump to conclusions. A person could be also hypersensitive to the slightest hint of behavior or appearance that seems to reinforce a stereotype. A person may be treated differently according to one's perception of that stereotype as well. Members of a particular group may also act out stereotypic behavior, either knowingly or subconsciously or unknowingly. And individuals that are trying to kind of find themselves, they may find themselves under pressure to act in a particular way. This can be called internal oppression. You know you're not one ingredient. You are a unique flavor that could only be created by a combination of all of your ingredients in exactly the right proportions. Some of us are sweeter, some of us sour, but nobody is made of just hummus, or would all be best friends. Yet many times in your life, you're going to be viewed as a one ingredient dish. You also know that other people are just as unique. Yet whether you realize it or not, you're constantly seeing them as one ingredient as well. And if that one ingredient is one you've heard nothing but bad things about, you'll probably never even taste them to learn their true flavor. And that is not where you want to go. So what do? as you start forcing yourself to realize that everyone is made up of dozens and dozens of different ingredients, many of which make up a part of you soup, you'll realize something reality shaking. Even though you're completely unique, you're not that unique either. You're a unique combination of common ingredients, and that is awesome. It's awesome to know that every person you meet probably shares at least some identity with you, a form of common ground. And it's comforting to know that there are other people out there who do know your plight and can understand some of the things that you are going through. In this way, these big picture group identities are wonderful to have. Okay, so now you understand the idea of you soup, and you have a better idea of how we can absolutely be unique and not absolutely unique at the same time. Here's some food for thought as you continue to chew on this idea. Even though you may share a group identity with someone, you don't necessarily know their story. Ever notice how some foods taste better when other foods are taken in the same bite, kind of like taking broccoli with cheese or something yummy like that? Identities are the same way. Combinations of those identities makes a huge difference. Even though you may share a group identity with someone, you don't necessarily know their story. Sorry, this is incredibly important, so I had to say it twice. Be careful deconstructing a person or yourself down to the individual ingredients. While this will be a great learning experience and eye-opening in many ways, for every ingredient you know about, there's likely something that you don't, and this goes for yourself as well. So those secret ingredients could have the biggest impact of all. So try to have a relationship with an entire person, not one of their identities. You are inevitably going to be drawn to certain ingredients and others, but a healthier relationship is one that is holistically inclusive of all identities. And this includes the relationship with yourself as well as others. This is another great resource that they have called the Gingerbread Person, which goes into a little bit more information about the gender identity. I've got the link here, and again, I took a lot of this from Metrosexual.com. Sorry, from It's Pronounced Metrosexual.com. And I hope that you will go check out that website for more information. I'm also going to have links for our Pride Center at Cal Poly Pomona, as well as some other helpful links if you would like to get to know more. Thank you for watching.